I guess welcome to the first State of Your World kind of webinar or sharing of ideas. I'm not sure what it's called. We will come thinking of a name for that. But the idea was that a few of us who are practitioners, academics in the space would get together at least every quarter just to share where the state of our world is, and to kind of identify certain trends that are coming up, and bounce ideas off each other. And then this is a space that allows us to interact and share that. So we are experimenting with this. We're not sure how it's going to go, but I think let's see. So welcome everyone to the space, and thank you for joining. I probably will start a little bit as to where my kind of thinking is at the moment, and it's been quite interesting. So I've just moved back from Geneva to Sri Lanka over the last week, and it's been quite interesting because I've come just at the beginning of what is the Cricket World Cup. So for those of you for those of you, actually all of you who are Americans, there, you may not know what cricket is. It's a sanitized version of baseball, which is there. But there's Team USA that is actually playing in the World Cup, right? So they're there. Although on a funny note, majority of them are from the Indian subcontinent, but that's a different story. But the biggest kind of thing that happened there is there was this big debate as to whether India and Pakistan would play because they're supposed to play each other. And at one point, they were not going to play. There was a boycott until the president of Sri Lanka intervened, talked to the prime ministers of both India and Pakistan, and now has got both countries to agree that their teams can play, and it's being played in Sri Lanka. So it's quite an interesting. So for me, that sort of reflected how sports sports is equally a space where there can be a space for some engagement, some dialogue, when often countries are not able to speak to each other, and how it's a form of diplomacy, and it's something there that I haven't hasn't really struck me before, but I think it's quite important there. And so I think that really then speaks to the power of everyday community engagement and creating those spaces for that type of engagement. And I think just increasingly as I look across the world, and it's very interesting to be in this part of the world and look at what's happening, or how things in the US have been covered, or how things in the Europe have been covered, and people just looking across and saying, what is going on? Like, how are things going really crazy there in the US, for example, and not beginning to understand some of what is happening there. And then you try to kind of explain some of what the challenges are in terms of communities not knowing each other, and people not knowing each other. And then people begin to understand that we have similarities in terms of those things. So I think it's been quite interesting there. So I think the biggest take for me, and I'm sort of looking at this, is that the concept of how do we get communities to get to know each other and work with each other. And this last week we've also had a visit from some colleagues from Canada who work with something called the Million Peacemakers. I think some of you may have come across them. So they did a piece for Peace Prospects, and so they were visiting Sri Lanka, and one of the things that they were talking about is just focusing on what we can control and not what we can't control. And so what we can control is the humanizing of the other. And I think that's what has struck me over the last week or 2 weeks, is just the fact that we need to spend now more time and effort to work on humanizing the other, whatever that means, whether it's through sports or music or whatever. And I think that's the space that I'm kind of thinking, how do we create those opportunities for us to get to know each other a lot better? And maybe that's something even for us as practitioners that obviously we all have share some similarities because obviously we're working peace leadership or peace education or whatever. We're all interested in peace, but beyond that, how much are we bringing of ourselves into this conversation? And maybe it's something that I would love to sort of see how where that takes us. So that's sort of my reflections at 10 to 12 on on a on a Thursday evening. So yeah, I'm just handing it over to whoever else would like to take that forward. Maybe Lisa, you've unmuted, so
Yeah,
okay.
I'd love to follow up. So much of what you're saying is resonating for me, Amjad. Yeah, so I live in the US, in Massachusetts, and yeah, I mean, similar, even to what you're saying, thinking what is going on, here and so disturbed by everything that's going on, like in Minneapolis and ICE, and so many people are talking about it. And I think it's definitely been top of my mind for, lots of reasons and probably others in this space. And it's just I don't know. It's so interesting, all these different things are coming up, in the that's happening, and all these different things are coming up around, like in my world, that are kind of, speaking to that and responding to that. And so I'm I'm stumbling a little bit because I don't know where to start. But this idea of what you're talking about, Amjad, about, community and getting to know each other, I feel like that's also been coming up in my world as well in lots of different ways. Um, so one of them is so Euphrates is running right now a course called Pathways to Courage, which is being run by Fran Faraz. She's teaching the class. And it's an 8 week course, and I'm supporting. I'm the tech person, and supporting and thinking about the materials and the facilitation plan and everything. But really, during the sessions, I get to be also a student and to listen and to be part of it, which is really great. And the last session, Fran talked a lot about anger, and where anger comes from, and fear, and how those interact with each other. And I won't do it justice and try to summarize, 90 minutes, but really did a good job of helping to unpack that, and how it affects us as individuals, but also how that carries over into groups and to communities and cultures. And I've thought about this stuff before, but it's got me thinking about it in a different way. And I think something that Fran really emphasized in the class is that you and I might be feeling fear about what's going on, and anger, but so are the other people, like on the other side, quote unquote. Like they're also feeling fear. They're also feeling insecurity. They're also worrying, about things, and also, probably, feeling some anger. And so thinking about, like, how do you sit with your own like feelings, and grapple with your own feelings, while also like acknowledging that others are also experiencing something as well, and that they're not just, I'm preaching to the choir here a little bit, but I feel like I needed to be reminded. It's something I needed to be reminded of right now, I guess is what I want to say. It's like in an intellectual way. I know these things, but needed to be reminded. Um, and then just like how important it is, to think about from other people's point of view. And then we also talked a little bit about, the anger that can come, that we might use our anger to fuel our like activism or our work. And you know, that's not the only way, that there are other ways, that we can accept others and love others, even if we don't agree with them. And there's other ways that we can fuel our activism. And anyway, again, I'm not doing this justice, but that's so I've been thinking about that a lot. And I'm thinking about it like in my own personal life, but also thinking about it like in our country and in the world. And then the other thing that's like been coming up, so I, have this like monthly get together with some friends that we all live in different places, and we get together on Zoom. And multiple people in our group were talking about this idea that you're bringing up, Amjad, of community and how important community is and how important it is to like connect with others and create these spaces to get to know each other. Um, and that as a way to combat, like what's going on and this division and this othering and dehumanization. And so we talked a lot about, really simple things that we're, different people were doing or seeing, so one friend is having every other Sunday evening hosting a dinner with neighbors and friends and invites different people to get to meet each other and to come together. And, another is, their neighbor is hosting, these like periodic get-togethers where different neighbors come together. And I'm part of a neighborhood dog walk, every week where I get to know all these neighbors that I would never otherwise know. Um, just these different things that are like they seem small, but are really powerful. And they're great for us for building connection and for our own like personal like health, but also in kind of breaking down some of those barriers. So that's I've been thinking about that a lot. Um, I think I had another point that was much more brilliant, but now I'm losing it. Um, yeah, I'll stop there for now. But those are like some of the things I've also been thinking about. It's like, yeah, how do we Oh, I know the last one. Most importantly, I've been thinking about Bad Bunny and the Super Bowl show. That's what I've been thinking about a lot this week. And just, yeah, and I know who Bad Bunny is and I appreciate it, but I think I've just been thinking a lot about that, like that show and the use of music, as like nonviolent resistance and that whole message of like, choosing love over hate and yeah, that's been all those things have been kind of really living and really present for me in the this last week, even in the last couple weeks. Now I'm done. Thanks for listening, you guys.
Lisa, I have to say your conversation too about like nonviolent resistance and what's happening, with ICE in Minnesota. I'm from Minneapolis and in Phoenix now, and things are starting to rev up here. Um, but like in the state of my world, I'm now directing the World Citizen Peace Ambassador Center, and that's precisely like I've been doing a lot of writing and thinking about nonviolent resistance because, like out of Minneapolis in particular, there is a beautiful wealth of strategy of nonviolent resistance that's very creative too. Like I highlighted some in our recent newsletter. Some of the peace ambassadors that are have developed, and people like all of these deep mutual aid networks that are, now like 30,000 observers are trained in the Twin Cities area, and then having these kind of rapid response networks and all of these different ways to both like come together in community, but also be protesting or resisting what's happening. And one of my favorite examples of kind of a more creative one right now is like there's a singing resistance group that they started like kind of in the streets and then coming together in church. And the last video I saw of theirs was actually they were outside of the hotels that ICE agents are in down by the university, and we're singing a song about you can change your mind, like you're always welcome back, but it was still this like still a element of the kind of us versus them. And that's what I've been personally struggling with, um, with the really dynamic challenges within the United States, within the sociopolitical, as well as like how that's affecting educational policy. To not like fall into this othering us versus them mentality. And to be very honest, like it's been hard at times because I feel like so, both anger, but also like almost a despair, like, are you kidding me? just stop, like stop. Why are you doing this? But then really noticed it like talking to a friend who's much more conservative and feeling like I don't even want to talk to you right now. And you're somebody I've known for decades. And I'm like, I don't even want to have this conversation because I'm feeling activated as a result of it. And so I think, as peace educators, peace builders, like it is easy to intellectually talk about these things, but of course, putting it into practice and like staying grounded from that place of, connection and respect for diversity, even if that doesn't feel like it's being reciprocated, it's not always easy. So that's what I've been definitely like trying to bring myself back to love and to that sense of like deeper connection when I find that sort of us versus them mentality creeping in. But yeah, that definitely, when you spoke to that, I was like, yes, at a deep level, all that has been happening for me.
I think the sort of the notion that I hear from all of you too is a sort of idea about like there's joy in the resistance, right? If we can find that joy, Bad Bunny showed us that, right? That there's love and there's joy and that we can come together. And I think those pieces are so important. I've been particularly thinking about the idea of critical hope as a key component of peace leadership. It's something that like I've written about a couple times, and my late colleague Ryan Satterwhite, who I'd love to bring into conversations, a sustainability leadership person. If you don't know his work, I encourage you to look at it. But he introduced me to the concept, and I really think that it speaks so much to all the things that we talk about, sort of this idea that we can be hopeful, that we can want peace and we can work for peace, but that doesn't mean we turn around and turn a negative view to the things that are happening in our lives. We take them under advisement. We know they're happening, right? We can understand the fact that terrible things are happening. We've got systems and structures in place that set us up to fail, and that we can carry those while also still being hopeful. And I feel like I see that, and I've sort of sat in that a lot recently. Is sort of this like balance between these thoughts of like despair and what's happening and what can we do and what's going on in the world and things look really bleak, and this sort of thought like, but look at these pockets of change, look at these stories that each of you shared about opportunities for folks to come together, right? And how do we balance those? And we've those of us here in the US context, I'm in Southern California, we've talked a lot about the sort of ICE in the idea of ICE being in our communities right now in Southern California is no different. And one of the things that allows me to have some of that critical hope is the youth. There have been many, many high schools throughout Southern California who have walked out and demonstrated. And it has been just, I've been so proud of them, of the students who are willing to put themselves at risk, put their education at risk because of something that they believe so strongly in. There's some local high schools here that had a really big walkout, and some of the middle schools joined too. And so it's not just the high schools, it's the middle school students too, the kids who are, 12, 13 years old, who are really starting to take notice and realize that ICE in our communities are impacting their friends. It's impacting their friends' families. It's impacting themselves, right? That this is really more than just what maybe people see on the news. And so I've been really, really, really hopeful when I see students and a high school that I think folks generally consider as to be fairly conservative actually just staged a walkout too. And that was really impressive, I think, to me. So it's not just folks that we anticipate from like, liberal Southern California, right? There are folks all over sort of Southern California who are doing this work in pockets that are historically liberal, but then also in pockets that maybe are not. That is a widespread issue. And I think a lot about the fact that if we find these pockets, right? If we find the singing group, right? If we find the sports folks that are willing to work together, right? If we find the neighbors who are walking their dogs, right? We can begin to sort of focus on that hope and really sort of take root into that without ignoring all the terrible things that we have to work against, and knowing that we have to work against them and being angry about them, right? Like that's a legit feeling for sure. I think I'm at the risk of speaking for all of us. I'm sure that we've been fairly angry at some point in time in the last few years. But that idea that we can sort of hold all that constant at the same time, which is a really hard and is a lot of work. But I keep reminding myself of that. Like every time I swoop down into sort of this like, oh, things are terrible mode, I try to then go find the things that are giving me hope and knowing that like we actually have some amazing folks doing some really, really, really incredible work. And that is definitely extremely inspiring for me and allows me to keep doing my work every day because I can think about those folks who are doing their work and know that over time will make a difference.
I like what you said to there, Whitney, of um, kind of honoring the difference between just like being optimistic or like the glass is half full kind of view, which can serve, but that's also not to me the same thing as hope. And I'm part of a group at Arizona State, the Education for Planetary Futures, and we're actually focusing on hope right now in a project. So I've been rereading critical um, uh prayers, pedagogy of hope, and like just going into those ideas. And that's something that our group has really also talked about, of just that often hope is connected to that action, whether you're witnessing, these high school students, middle school students, and that's inspiring hope, or you're finding that action within yourself. And for me, sometimes that action is actually like an inaction of like, okay, I need to rest so that I can kind of like cultivate my energy in order to, continue this peace education, peace building work. But I think, sometimes we can put that like shiny sticker of like, oh, it's not all that bad. Well, it is in my view. Like things are pretty bad, and I don't, and not acknowledging and like honoring that, or honoring the anger, honoring the fear, alongside of that both and of like the joy and the hope and the resiliency and the healing and the community. Um, I think that's just like that's such a part of life and peace building, that we have to be able to hold those two truths simultaneously and like balance them within our work and within ourselves.
I will say too, to put some more of the joy side into, I actually am teaching a peace leadership class this semester, which I haven't been able to do in a couple of years. And it's completely full. And we've had two sessions so far, and the conversations have been so incredibly rich. And we have folks who are pursuing graduate education who really want to make peace leadership a part of their lives, a part of their work, a part of their research. And it's so inspiring to me to be around folks who are genuinely interested and care. And we're only 2 weeks in, right? And so I think that there's a lot of hope that I get sort of from that space too. There's hope I get from these conversations, right? From finding like-minded folks who are trying to do this work and realizing that there are so many more of us than I think that we know, right? I mean, although we all tend to seems like know each other in some ways or another, but there's so many more folks out there who are doing the work, and there's so many great networks of folks. And like the more we in the Peace Leadership Collaborative meet people and connect with people, the more people we learn that are out there doing this incredible work. And I think it is, and it can be such a wide network of folks. And there's so many more of us who I think really care about building peaceful communities and creating peaceful, inclusive, equitable spaces than I think even maybe we realize. And I think that's something that gives me hope and excitement too, is knowing that it is a ripple effect, and it's rippling. Maybe isn't rippling as fast as we want it to ripple, but it is rippling, right? We do see that that's happening, and that gives me a lot of excitement and joy too.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm struck by the this recurring theme of hope. And I think Lisa, our finally published polylog talked about what we call radical hope, right? And it's something that I was saying that hope is not this naive optimism, but actually it's a choice, almost like a discipline that you practice because you believe that there is something better out there, and so you work on that perspective, and so it's we talk. So I often talk about radical hope, sort of showing up not because the path is clear, but because it isn't, and so you kind of focus on the fact that transformation is still possible even when systems are failing. And I, to the point of Whitney, you talked about young people that they're sort of saying, I know things can be different, and I'm willing to build that difference. I'm willing to call out as well. And I I keep on talking about how we know the story of the emperor with no clothes, right? And the emperor's dress, and it was that young person who had the courage to call that out, right? And I think that is something that we probably need to encourage a lot more of, um, and sort of how give people that sense of refusing inevitable outcomes, and sort of saying that there is something much more positive about that, which is why I think a lot of people always go back to um, the "I Have a Dream" speech and why that was so powerful at that time. Uh, because I think it was that type of radical hope that comes in. That is something that we need to sort of think about how we create those spaces for that type of thing. And I think I was reflecting, Lisa, one of the things that I don't think we do enough of is creating a space for the breaking of bread. And I think that food is such a great leveler and bringing people together. And sometimes you often find that there are similarities in foods that you make, or the fact that everyone, different communities have rice, but they each have it differently. And those are fun conversation starters, and I think that helps to humanize the other communities. And maybe we need to think about how we do that a lot more. Just bringing that together, and I think it starts with just. I mean, it's back to the Euphrates model, right? We start with ourselves, we then go to our family and then community, and I think we need to do that a lot more. And I think that's something that we need to kind of think about as well.
Amjad, I appreciate that. As I was reflecting earlier, like I feel like I'm spending most of my time with people who are of relatively like minds in conversation, and um, but I'm craving like crossing the table and breaking bread together because I think again that like how do we find a path forward out of like these deep divides are through those types of meaningful conversation and even just that presence in those kinds of spaces. So really appreciated that. And Whitney, when you were mentioning to you about hope, like kind of other state of my world here is I think there are so many people around the world who are like ready and willing and looking and, taking action to get involved in different aspects of peace education and peace building. And I'll just illustrate that with an example from the World Citizen Peace Ambassador Center, we put a call out for our Peace Ambassador Advisory Council. We're building a global one and a West African focused one to start, and very focused on peace leadership within the group is the plan. And we had 160 applicants for those spaces. So it was, and, so I'm like, oh gosh, this is going to take a while to really go through these and add in more interview time. But just like that there's a lot of people are like, yes, I want to get involved in different ways. And I'm getting emails every day like, Ma, what do you think about if we did this? It's just really hopeful and really inspiring. And I think, within peace leadership, like I'm trying to figure out both how to like support that, to coordinate that from the positionality that I'm in, but also just to allow, like, so I think it's more of just like creating the structure and the space and then letting everybody do their thing. And so trying to kind of figure out a way in order to do that, because ultimately like empowering people to allow them to take the peace actions within the families and communities and those different ways. I mean, that's going to be more of an impact and a ripple than like if I just try to hold on to something. So that sort of participatory community, participatory action research, like that's the space that I'm really trying to ground my work within as well.
So one of the funny things that happened. So I think it was last September, October in the UK. There was a big we need to take back the UK. UK sort of marches, and it was led by people who are very closely aligned with the MAGA kind of ideology and everything else. And they were there saying we take back UK from the migrants take it over and everything else. What was really funny about it was that there were all these people walking around with St. George's flag and everything else. And then when it came to um, going to get something to eat, they all went to the local kebab or curry shop and were getting curries, right? And so it was funny because they'd all come from protesting the fact that all migrants are coming and taking over people's jobs and everything. Their culture is disappearing. And the first thing they're doing is going off and getting kebabs and curries. And so I think that there is something there that I don't know how we fully understand it. And I think someone said earlier on that, people are also feeling angry and upset on that side. And we need to figure out how we create a space for understanding and reflecting on that and sort of seeing and recognizing that sometimes it's also intergenerational, right? So they may be carrying trauma from their parents or grandparents or whatever. And it's something that I've been reflecting on. And I mean, I know that I'm probably the only one who's not in the US at the moment, right? So I know that so it's quite interesting to kind of look at this from afar and sort of seeing this. And I was sort of reflecting that if this was any other country, how would I be analyzing what is happening here, right? In terms of a transit, I would have called it a political transition. And we would be analyzing what does this look like in terms of democracy, in terms of governance and everything else. And I started to reflect back and sort of saying, how far back is this trauma happening? And I know, I mean, it's not I have no basis on where to kind of look, but I was thinking, does this go back as far as the Civil War in the US, where those wounds haven't yet been healed? And so we have in theory, we would sort of say if you don't deal with that in generations to come, this is going to come back. And it's going to come back there. And so, if it was any other country, we would be sort of thinking, okay, this is going back. And so for me, that there's something quite interesting there that I was saying, okay, well, what do we do to even go back and acknowledge and reconcile the defeat of one side and the victory of another side, and how do we explore that, and what does that mean for moving forward. And then my mind goes to, okay, if you're a fan of the Star Wars trilogy or all of the Star Wars films, you can actually, it's a great peace building thing of how you can't just defeat militarily, right? You have to win hearts and minds, and you have to, otherwise someone's going to rise up again, and it's going to bring back the same thing if you're not able to kind of understand that. And I think that there's so many lessons in terms of how we deal with that. And that's something I think we need to figure out how we address this and what does this look like, and I think this is part of the conversations. And this is also, even in Europe, it's also happening that they there's collective guilt about how things happened with the Second World War, and they dealt with it in one way, but they haven't fully addressed it. And then I look at what's happening in Sri Lanka with the end of the conflict and saying, okay, actually, we haven't dealt with it. We're kind of just, papering over, and so thinking, okay, but we haven't really dealt with the issues, and this is going to come back later on. And I think this is the challenge that we all face now.
Yeah, such good points, Amjad. I'm also feeling overwhelmed by it, honestly. Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. And yeah, yeah, how do we overcome that? And how do we, yeah, I don't know. I don't have anything brilliant to add. Just, yeah, definitely hearing that. Yeah, I've been thinking this isn't responding to that, but maybe a little bit like thinking about like we talk about with the Peace Leadership Collaborative wanting to like bring, research and practice together and, create opportunities for learning. And I think I'm thinking about, and it's a question's coming up in response to what you just said, like what can we, I'm interested in how people are learning from past movements. I was reading an article the other day about how people in Minneapolis are like using some of the tactics, that were used with them within some of the civil rights movement in the U.S. And um, it's just one tiny example. There's lots of, people have learned so much, from Gandhi and, and Martin Luther King Jr. and all these other, leaders throughout history. And so I'm thinking a lot about what can we learn, from other cultures and other movements and history, like you were saying. And yeah, I'm not articulating this very well, but there's just like these questions of like, it's interesting to see where that learning is happening right now and how it's affecting, what choices people are making and what they're doing, and also thinking about what more could we learn. Um, and then the researcher evaluator in me is kind of like really interested in like these different things that people are, trying, the examples, in the US. There are lots of others though throughout the, throughout the world. But these different things that people are doing to try to build community, to try to build connection, to try to like heal, these wounds, these, the big like issues that you're talking about, Amjad. It's just, yeah, just curious, like, yeah, what can we take from, what we know about peace leadership and what else could we learn, yeah, so it's going on in my mind right now.
I've been starting to do a little bit more like research and chatting with a couple of professors that are in like the reconciliation studies and like reconciliation research. And I think that that's a space in which that's already well established in the field. It connects to just what we're talking about models of healing that actually through reconciliation and healing that resulted in it. So your comments, both from Jada and Lisa, are making me just kind of think more about that and how that intersects with peace leadership, and also how we can really perhaps learn from what's already, established within that field and then expand upon it within this, kind of framework and particular audience.
I think we've we've written several potential articles and books today in my mind, as part of the research arm group of the Peace Leadership Collaborative. I think we've given ourselves a lot of potential tasks of things to further explore just in one first conversation, which I think is very impressive. So good job, team. And we're a small but mighty group today too. So I think we're gonna sort of bring our conversation here today to a close. And thank those of you who've decided to join us and watch us, and hopefully you've been inspired and connected and maybe want to do some of this research and share stories and narratives of folks doing great work alongside of us as well. I think that this has been for me at least, a really engaging conversation, and we are hoping to keep this going. So we'll stay tuned, I guess, for future conversations as well for us in this group, and having some other folks join us too as we move forward. So any final words from anyone as we wrap up? Thank you to all of you for sharing. Doing a quick look around in the Zoom. All right. Well, thank you all so much.